Wake up now, Sally. Let me alone. Wake up. You gotta wake up. What is it, Charlie? What's wrong? You gotta get dressed, honey. You gotta get the baby Levon and we gotta get out of here. Why is it? Was there a fire? Sally, honey, don't ask questions. You just get baby Levon dressed so we can hurry up and go. I gotta test the wind to see how much time we got. Sally Campion knew what leaving in the middle of the night meant. AWOL. Charlie was going AWOL. He was bringing her and baby Levon with him. Won't they send soldiers after us? Not tonight, they won't. Wind's blowing east to west, thank God for that. Was there an accident? Oh, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, there was, wasn't there? An accident out there. I was playing solitaire. I looked up and saw the clock had gone from green to red. I turned on the monitor, Sally. They're all DEAD down there. What was it exactly? I don't know. I don't want to know. But it did kill KILLED them quick. If I'd have looked up 30 seconds later, I'd be shut up in that tower control room right now like a bug in a bottle. Sally took one final look at the bungalow they'd lived in for the last 3 years. They were leaving their entire lives behind. If the base gates are closed, I'm gonna crash through. The wind's blowing west. We're going east. It's gonna be all right, huh? By dawn, they would be riding east across Nevada, and Charlie would be coughing steadily. What I could say is this. They gotta screw this inflation crap, screw this national debt crap. We got the presses and we got the paper. We gotta run off $50 million bills and pump them into circulation. Well, that wouldn't get us nowhere. That's right, Hap, fix right. If they do that, it'll be just like Richmond in the last 2 years of States War. Better turn off them pumps, Hap. The pumps? Crust on a pony, it's coming right at us. Since it was Stuart Redmond, arguably the quietest man in Arnett, who flicked off the 8 gas switches, saving his life, by the way, and the lives of his friends. He was the only one who didn't see the Chevy as it hit the pump shearing him off. Holy moly! Will they blow, Hap? If it was gonna happen, it already would've. It's slowing down. It's stopping. They could smell the gas and hear the clock-like tick of the Chevy's cooling engine. What? What did you say? I'm pregnant, Jesse. And no, it's not a joke. How did it happen? I thought you were on the pill. Well, what I figure is, 1, someone in the quality control department of the Orville factory was asleep on the day my batch of pills went through. Or 2, they were feeding you UNH boys something in the mess hall that builds up sperm. Or 3, I forgot to take the pill and have since forgotten that I forgot. Don't be that way. Don't be mad at me. Take me to the Dairy Queen? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Ah, hell. Franny heard it all in those words. Everything she needed to know. Let's get married. No, Jesse. I don't want to marry you. The truth, plain and simple. Much easier to say aloud than Franny figured it would be. The harder part, she knew, would be telling her mother and father. Help! Someone get his legs! God damn! It was the smell issuing from the car that made Norm Brewitt turn away and start heaving. The sick stench of blood, fecal matter, vomit, and human decay. I got him, Hap. The office, Tommy. Let's get him inside. Stu Redmond had been in the war, but he'd never seen anything so terribly pitiful as this. Going by the flies, the young woman and baby had been dead for a while. Ambulance is on the way. The clock went red. Better roll him over. He's gonna choke on that mucus. My wife, my little girl, they're fine. They're all right. They were sick like me. It's in Salt Lake City. I guess we didn't move fast enough after all. Man, oh man. Far off, but getting closer, Stu could hear the whoop, whoop, whoop of the Arnett Volunteer Ambulance on its way. Didn't get away quick enough. Are Sally and baby Levon? They're fine. They're all right. Just take it easy, okay? What's he got, Vic? Any idea? Don't know. Might have been something they ate. Maybe they got tainted hamburgers. That happens. I hope so, because why? Stu could have answered Tommy, but he waited for Vic to say it. Because otherwise, it might be something catching. The man from the Chevy died 20 miles from the hospital in Braintree. In his wallet, there were $17 cash and a driver's license that identified him as Charles D. Campion. Also an Army card and pictures of his wife and daughter, encased in plastic for protection. Larry Underwood, sitting in his car, watching a rat take a bite out of a dead cat. Dear New York, come home. 5 days ago, he'd been in sunny Southern California, home of hopheads, religious freaks, and Disneyland. Maybe the Yankees are in town. That would make this trip worthwhile. For Larry, it had all started 18 months ago, when he recorded a demo of one of his songs, Baby Can You Dig Your Man. The session lasted 3 days. It was a good one. Then, 9 weeks ago, out of the blue, Columbia had called, saying they wanted to release Baby Can You Dig Your Man as a single. Larry signed a stinker of a contract and got a check for $500. 2 weeks later, Larry was reading, in Billboard magazine, that his song was one of the 3 hot prospects for the week. 5 weeks ago, the single had cracked Billboard's Hot 100. Larry found this out at lunch with some real biggies from Columbia, who gave him another much larger check. No one at the table would seem to care that he'd been drunk. Not long after that, the week spring came to Los Angeles. Larry heard Baby Can You Dig Your Man on the radio for the first time. He was holding a bag of Toll House cookies walking out of his kitchen. 2 weeks ago, the single hit number 47, and the party had begun in earnest. Larry rented a beach house in Malibu, and then, after that, things got a bit hazy. People wandered in and out of the house, always more of them, mostly strangers. He remembered snorting coke and chasing it with tequila. He remembered a girl who had bum-tripped and gone screaming down the bone-white beach naked as a nuthatch. He remembered, 6 days ago, June 13th, Wayne Stuckey sitting him down on the beach in front of his party house saying, "You have to pull the plug, Larry. The booze, the dope, the whoring, the party's got to end. If I pull the plug, I'm gonna look like the asshole of the world. Yeah, they'll call you names, but they're not your friends. Your friends saw what was happening and split the scene 3 days ago. Every last one of them but me." Stuckey was the closest thing Larry had to a brother, and he made sense. Go back to your house and pull the plug, Larry. And you get in your car and you go. Just go, man. And stay away until you're right in the head. So that's what Larry Underwood had done. Driven across country and come home to New York. And was now sitting in his car, drifting in and out of sleep, wondering if he'd dreamed the rat eating the... "Mom, I knew that was you from the window. Come on up, I'll make you breakfast." After eggs, bacon, toast, juice, and coffee. "So you came back. I guess I got to missing you, Ma." "Oh, is that why you wrote me so often? 'Cause you missed me so much?" I'm not much of a letter writer. I hear that song you got on the radio. I tell people, that's my son, that's Larry. Most of them don't believe it. I get a royalty, a percent of every record." He was crying suddenly. The truth was, he had come home because he was afraid, and he wanted his mother. "Larry, do you want to stay here, son? The rollaway's still in the back bedroom." "Could I? Would you mind?" Alice Underwood looked at her son, now a grown man, but still the same old Larry, going along, not thinking, getting people, himself included, into jams, and when the jams got bad enough, giving in to the weakness in his character. Once, she had told herself Larry would change, but now Alice feared that his days of change, of the deep and fundamental sort of minister called a change of soul rather than of heart, were done. Oh, there was potential for good in her son, great good, but Alice knew. This late on, it would take nothing short of a catastrophe to bring it out. "You're tired. I'll make up the bed, then you can sleep." Larry tried to remember the last time he had cried in front of his mother. He was still trying later, when he fell asleep for 18 hours. "You kids, shut your heads." "Yes, Daddy." No sign of their mother Lila anywhere. Norm felt tired and queasy, thumping headache, like he was hungover, but he had only had 3 beers at Haps before Campion arrived in his Chevy. A hit song came over the cracked Philco radio by the stove. Norm turned it off before it could split his head, and found the note Lila had left for him sitting next to it. She was out babysitting for Ralph Hodges' wife. Ralph's 3 kids. For $1. It was hard to think past the headache, but Norm slowly pieced it together. His wife had gone to babysit another woman's kids and stuck him with Luke and Bobby for a lousy $1. Hard times, these. He was trying to decide if he was hungry or not when it came out of him. A big, wet HATCHOO! So he was sick too, on top of everything else, coming down with a summer cold. It never occurred to Norm to think of the phlegm that had been running out of Charlie Campion's nose and mouth. Not till much later, once his boy started sneezing too. Finnegan, coroner, got Dr. James to look at his Campion, and then the 2 of them got on the phone to Houston. And then, at around 3, they landed in the Braintree airport. They who? Pathologists. 3 of them. Worked on Campion's body. Cutting it up, is my guess. And then they got on the phone to the plague center in Atlanta. Those guys are going to be here this afternoon. That plague center's federal. They wouldn't send out a plane load of federal men, even if it were, hell, I don't know, cholera. A heavy silence fell over the men. Stu watched Hap take the handkerchief out of his pocket and wipe his nose with it. Anyway, I thought you guys had a right to know. From all I heard, you were just trying to lend a hand. It's appreciated, Joe Bob. I'll get in touch with the others. Tommy, Norm, I'll tell them what you said. Just keep my name out of it. I don't want to lose my job. And your buddies don't need to know who tipped you off, do they? No. Say, that's 5 even for the gas, Joe Bob. I hate to charge you, but you want to watch that. Nothing worse than a summer cold. That's the truth. Yeah, but maybe it ain't a cold. I woke up this morning sneezing and hacking away. Had a mean headache, too. I took some aspirin and it's gone down some, but I'm still full of snot. Hap stared at Vic, scared, then admitted. Norm Brewitt has a cold, too. That's why he ain't here. He's home with his boys, sick as a dog. Maybe we're all coming down with it. What that Campion had, what he died of. For the first time in a long while, Stu spoke. You know, Hap, might not be such a bad idea to close the station. Just for today. General Bill Starkey, who began his career in the military 36 years ago as a West Point plebe, who has won countless medals in his service of his country, who has spoken to many presidents and even offered some of them advice, who has been through dark times before, but this... The accident had occurred almost perfectly between shifts. Project Blue's cafeteria had only been lightly populated. Starkey thought, you will spend eternity with your face in a bowl of tomato soup. Billy? Those men who handled Campion's body in Arnett have been through the prelims in Atlanta, and they all tested positive, except for one. Stuart Redmond, who's negative so far, but who knows how long that's gonna last. If only Campion hadn't run. That was sloppy security, Len. Very sloppy. Go on. Arnett's been quarantined and we've isolated at least 16 cases of constantly shifting A-prime flu there. On the plus side, as far as the media is concerned, they believe this is an anthrax situation. Thank God for that, at least. What else, Len? We have a Texas Highway Patrolman, Joseph Robert Brentwood, whose cousin owns the gas station where Campion ended up. He dropped by there yesterday morning to tell Hapscomb the health department people were coming, and was exposed to A-prime, Starkey thought. We picked him up 3 hours ago, Billy. But in the meantime, he'd been off trolling half of East Texas. And God knows how many people he's been in contact with. Christ. 99.4% communicability, Starkey thought. 99.4% excess mortality. On June 18th, 5 hours after he had talked to his cousin Bill Hapscomb, Joe Bob Brentwood pulled Harry Trent, an insurance man, over for speeding on Highway 40. While Brentwood wrote out the ticket, Trent jokingly tried to sell him a life insurance policy. Dying was the last thing on Joe Bob's mind. A day later, Trent stopped at an East Texas cafe called Babe's Quick Eat for lunch. Harry felt a little under the weather, but was in a good enough mood to leave the sweet thing that waited on him a big fat tip, a $10 bill that was crawling with death. In the Quick Eats parking lot, Trent stopped to help New Yorker Edward M. Norris, who was on vacation with his family. Trent gave Norris very clear directions to US 21 heading north. He also, unwittingly, served the man and his family their death warrants. That evening, the Norris family stayed in a Eustis, Oklahoma travel court, Ed and his wife Trish infected the clerk. Their kids, Marcia, Stanley, and Hector, infected the kids they played with on the travel court's playground. Kids bound for West Texas, Alabama, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Everybody was getting into the act. The next morning, at a doctor's office in Paulston, Oklahoma, poor Hector Norris was glass-eyed with a terrible fever. The Norrises infected no less than 25 people, including a matronly woman, Sarah Bradford, who would go on to pass the disease to her entire bridge club that night. After bridge, Sarah and her best friend Angela Dupree went out for a quiet drink in a cocktail bar. They rehashed their playing and, simultaneously, managed to infect everyone in the Paulston bar with the disease that would soon be known across the disintegrating country as Captain Trips. The next day, Angela's teenage daughter Samantha would go on to infect everybody in the swimming pool at the Paulston YMCA, and so on. Chain letters don't work. Everybody knows that. But this one, the Captain Trips chain letter, was working very well indeed. The pyramid, with Charlie Campion at its tip, was being built. All the chickens were coming home to roost.
Just roll up your sleeve, Mr. Redmond. This won't take a minute.
No.
It's only your blood pressure. Doctor's orders.
If it's doctor's orders, then let me talk to a doctor.
I'm only doing my job, Mr. Redmond. You don't want to get me in trouble, do you?
They had come to Arnett and got him on the afternoon of the 17th. 4 Army men and a doctor, all of them wearing sidearms, which meant, to Stewart, that he was in serious trouble. Go back and tell him I won't cooperate. They'll send somebody.
Patty Greer was quite upset that you gave her trouble. That's not very nice, Mr. Redmond, is it?
I want some answers. I want to know where my friends are. I want to know why, if my town's been quarantined. I haven't seen anything about it on that TV in the corner.
I simply don't have the authority to tell you anything. I know very little myself.
You've been taking my blood. If you want more, you either start giving me answers or you send big men to get it. And no matter how big they are, I'm going to try to rip holes in them germ suits.
Mr. Redmond, your lack of cooperation may do your country a great disservice. Do you understand that?
From where I'm sitting, it's my country that's doing me the disservice. Now get the hell out of here and send someone who can talk to me. Redmond's fear was big inside him, like a runaway elephant. It would be 40 more hours before they sent him a man who would answer some of his questions. What's on your mind, Franny? I'm pregnant, Daddy. Oh, Franny. For sure? For sure. Well then, you'd better come over here and sit with me. Peter Goldsmith held his daughter for a long time. When Franny's tears began to taper off, she asked him, Do you still like me? What? Yes, I still like you fine, Franny. Which made her cry again. But this time they weren't great braying sobs. When she'd finished the second time, Was it that, Jess? Yes, he said he would marry me, but... Oh, he means well, but 2 semesters ago we went to a poetry reading, Daddy, given by a man named Ted Enslin, and the place was packed and everyone was listening so solemnly. And it struck me as so pretentious, and well, you know me. Franny got the giggles. I did, and Daddy, I couldn't stop. And Jesse was furious with me. And I'm sure he had a right to be mad. It was a childish thing to do, but that's the way I am sometimes. And Jess isn't. And if we got married, you'd be unhappy? I guess I would be, Daddy. Don't let your mother change your mind then. She'll have plenty to say about all this, about who to blame. And I won't stop her, but I won't be with her. Do you understand that? Franny did. Her father never tried to oppose her mother anymore. She had a cruel tongue, and it could get out of control. I have to tell her, don't I? Peter Goldsmith had faced a choice many years ago. Continued opposition against his wife resulting in divorce, or surrender. Yes, but give it a day or two. For good or ill, he'd chosen surrender. They set upon Nick Andrews just around dusk. A quartet of good old boys. Vincent Hogan, Mike Childress, Billy Warner, and the worst of them, Ray Booth. Nick put up the best fight he could, decking one of them, and bloodying another's nose. So for that 1 or 2 hopeful moments, he thought he might actually win. Then one of them, the leader it seemed like, caught Nick just over the chin, shredded Nick's lower lip with some sort of school ring, and that was pretty much that. Why don't he say anything? Why don't he yell out, Ray? I told you not to use names, and I don't give a damn why he don't yell out. I'm gonna mess him up. Nick caught some of Ray's words. Somehow his wild kick connected with Ray's belly. It was probably the worst thing Nick could have done. Hold him. Hold him by the hair. You kicked me. You're a dirty fighter. Kicks and punches rained down on him. Then, Nick became a boneless, jittering puppet on a string, flopping around. After a while, in the last fading lights of day, Ray and his pals became only shapes. Easy, Ray! You want to kill him? Dimly, Nick thought he saw light splashing down the road, approaching fast. He felt himself being released. By that point, mercifully, Nick's consciousness was narrowing down to a pencil beam, before, even more eventually, snuffing out completely. Morning, sexy. I made us eggs and bacon. Was her name Maria? Larry couldn't remember. He was hungover and in pain. Oh no, honey, I gotta run. There's someone I gotta see, my mother. I'm staying with her and I didn't call last night. That much was true, at least. Thought you were a nice guy. Look, I'm sorry, I have to go. You ain't no nice guy. Any other man that spatula would have missed. But this was Larry, remember? You ain't no nice guy, and I bet you ain't the Larry Underwood that has that record either. Jesus! I hope you rot. I hope you fall in front of a subway train. You ain't no singer. You ain't got no mother. And you ain't no nice guy. Later, seeking refuge, Larry went to the Lux movie theater on 42nd Street. A horror movie was playing about a boogeyman who killed horny teenagers in their dreams. I am a nice guy. In one of the rows behind Larry, a man was coughing. When Nick came to, he was lying on a bunk behind bars in the pissant jail run by Sheriff John Baker. When I was a boy, we shot a mountain lion up in the hills and drug it 20 miles back home. What was left of that creature was the sorriest looking sight I ever saw. You, boy, are the second sorriest. It didn't take Baker long to figure out that Nick was deaf and couldn't talk. He could read lips, though, so they came up with a system to communicate. Baker talked, Nick wrote. All right, Nick Andros. What happened to you? Doc Soames and his wife almost ran you down like a woodchuck, boy. You see Rich's dog? Why don't I let you out of there and you can come into my office? Coffee hurt Nick's mouth, but tasted good. I'll tell you what. If you stick around, maybe we can get the guys who did this to you. How many were there? You think you could identify any of them? Even one of them? That's Ray Booth, my brother-in-law. Made perfect sense to Baker. He knew Ray and his goons, as vicious and cowardly as a dog pack. Sheriff Baker was going to have to tell his wife Janie about Booth. She knew her brother was a bad egg, but it still probably meant no Janie loving for Baker this week. Yes, sir, between this deaf-dumb drifter and the swollen glands that were throbbing under Baker's jaw, it was shaping up to be a wonderful day. I'm Dick Dietz. Denninger said you wouldn't play ball unless someone told you what the score was. What would you like to know? First, I guess I want to know why you're not wearing one of those spacesuits. We have a guinea pig, Geraldo, 2 rooms over. He's been breathing the same air as you for the last 3 days. He says you're not catching. Geraldo, huh? Well, what have I got? So far as Denninger and his colleagues have been able to ascertain, you don't have any disease or illness at all. What about the other people I came in here with? I'm sorry, that's classified. How did that fellow Campion get it? That's classified, too. Classified. My guess is that means Army. Mr. Redmond, you've disappeared from the face of the earth. If you start knowing too much, the big guys might decide the safest thing would be for you to disappear forever. Can you tell me how the others are doing at least? Deceased. All the men who were with you at the gas station. And their families as well. All of them? Everyone but... What did you do? Mr. Redmond, what did you people do? Nothing. On this one, responsibility spreads in so many directions it's invisible. It was an accident. We're trying to cope with it, but we're not responsible. Not even Campion's responsible. Given the circumstances, I would have run too. When do I get out of here? I don't know. It's classified? No, just unknown. You don't seem to have the disease. We want to know why you don't have it. Then we're home free. Achoo! 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 Oh my God! Calm down. I was faking. What? Faking? Why? Sorry, Dr. Dietz. That's classified. But go ahead and tell the big guys they can resume their tests on me. That night, Stu slept better than he had since they brought him to Atlanta. He had an extremely vivid dream. He had always dreamed a great deal. His late wife had complained about him thrashing and muttering in his sleep, but he'd never had a dream like this one. He was standing on a country road under a blazing summer sun surrounded by fields of green corn. There was the sound of crows far away. Closer by, someone was playing a hymn on a guitar. This is where I ought to get to, Stu thought. in the dream. Yeah, this is the place all right. He half remembered the hymn from his childhood, but couldn't place the tune. Then the music stopped, and the clouds came out of nowhere and blot out the sun. Stuart became afraid. He felt as if there was something worse than the plague, something in the corn, and it was watching him. Him, Stu thought. It's him. The man with no face. Oh, dear God. Oh, dear God, no! Then Stu woke up and his dream was gone, leaving behind feelings of disquiet, dislocation, and relief. He went to the sink and splashed water on his face. He went to the room's window and looked at the moon. All that corn must have been Iowa or Nebraska, maybe northern Kansas. The strange thing was, Stuart had never been to any of those places. The clock in the nurse's station touched midnight, and Nurse Patty Greer's break ended. Patty had to take Stuart Redmond's blood, and it irked her. She thought of him as an old poop. And Patty, who had broken a leg when she was 7 and had never spent a day in a bed since, had little patience for old poops. Good luck with Grumpy, Patty. Thanks, Janine. On her way to the White Room, where she would be sprayed and then helped into her hazard suit, Patty's nose began to tickle. She sneezed, lightly, into her hanky 3 times, and thought nothing of it. Achoo! 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 Before reaching the White Room, Patty infected an orderly, a doctor just coming off his shift, and another nurse on her midnight rounds. A new day and a new chapter for Captain Trips had begun. Lloyd Henreid and Andrew Polk Freeman had killed 6 people in as many days. The radio was referring to them as the interstate fugitives. Lloyd especially liked the sound of that. Gangbusters, Lloyd thought, then riffed. Take that, you dirty rat. Have a lead sandwich, you lousy kappa. Their stolen car was full of dope and shooting irons. 2 .38s, 3 .45s, the .357 mag that Polk called his pokerizer, 6 shotguns, and Lloyd's favorite, a Schmeisser submachine gun. The idea was that they should pull a quick store, get some money, get some maps, switch cars, and head north by the secondary roads. Get out of Arizona. You ready? I guess so. They were stoned, paranoid, and running on fumes. Inside, the shop smelled of stale licorice, sun, tobacco, and age. Present were the shop's proprietor, a cowboy buying smokes and Slim Jims, and a tired-looking woman deciding which spaghetti sauce her husband might like best. Just hold still and nobody'll get hurt. Holy gee, Polk. You didn't have to. I pokerized her, old buddy. Woo-woo! Polk? Shot me, Lloyd. He shot me. Look out! Lloyd swung around and fired at the cowboy more than reflex than in self-defense. He felt more than heard the cowboy's bullet as it zipped past him, close enough to part his hair. As for the cowboy, a man named Bill Markson. Bastard shot me. Stupid bastard blew my face off. It's okay, Pope. I got him. Screw this. Screw the money, Lloyd thought. There's money everywhere. The Arizona State Patrol, stopping by for hot dogs and slushies. Hold it right there. What's going on here? 3 people dead. Hell of a mess. Guy that did it went out back. I'm getting out of here. He's lying. He shot Bill Markson. The other one shot Mrs. Storm. I shot the other one. Put your hands up, right now. Less than an hour later, Lloyd Henreid would be in the Apache County pen, cursing the day he'd crossed paths with Polk. A little over a year ago, on a minimum security work farm in Nebraska. Franny Goldsmith had been listening to the measured ticks and tocks of the grandfather clock in their mother's parlor all of her life. For Franny, the clock summed up the room, oppressive and hateful. Everything she wished she could forget from her childhood. How could you do it? Go out and rut with that boy like a bitch in heat. Mother, Carla, are you expecting to stay in this house? Are you expecting us to feed you and board you? Well, no, I will not have it. I don't. I'm not staying here. I'm staying with either Bobby in Dorchester or Debbie in Somersworth, I suppose. Not that it's any business of yours. No business of mine. You ungrateful little... There's not a bit of shame in you. My God, what this is going to do to your father and me. It will break your father's heart. It don't feel so broken. Peter, you leave this to me. She told you first, and you kept it from me. Now the 2 of us are going to thrash this out, mother and daughter. This is not your province. It is. Daddy, don't you speak to him. Carla, I know you sweet-talked him into taking your side, but he is not the one you're dealing with today, miss. Stop it, Carla. Stop and listen to me. Peter, You stopped caring about Franny when Fred died. That's when you decided that caring hurt too much. You doted on your dead family and forgot the part of it still living. Don't you talk about Fred. Don't you talk to me about my son. He was my son too, but he's dead, Carla. Franny and her baby are alive. And if you drive her off, you'll have nothing but this room and a husband who'll hate you for what you did. Daddy. Mother. I want to go upstairs and lie down. I think I'd better lie down. Carla Goldsmith left the room. Then, listing like a drunken woman, she wouldn't let her husband or daughter help her, though both offered. Father and daughter stood in the parlor for a long time, in shock, listening to Carla's sobs coming from somewhere above them, as the grandfather clock ticked calmly on. Nick Andros, having his first home-cooked meal in a long time. I hope you're enjoying your dinner, Nick. My coleslaw's never been up to what Mother used to make. Well, that's what he says, anyway. Oh, hell, Janie. Your cold sounds worse. And look at your plate. You haven't eaten enough to keep a fly alive. I can afford to miss a meal now and then. And you're flushed, too. That means you're carrying a fever. And that means you're not going out again tonight. And that's final, John Baker. My dear, I have prisoners. They need to be fed and watered. Nick can do it. You're going to bed. And don't you start with your insomnia talk. I can't... I can't send Nick. He's a deaf mute. Besides, he ain't a deputy. Well, then, you'll just have to deputize him. He ain't a resident, Janie. I won't tell if you won't. And that, friends, was how Nick Andros went from show-yo prisoner to show-yo deputy in less than 24 hours. You've got the cot in the corner, Nick. It's hard, but it's clean. You be careful, boy. Remember, you can't call for help if there's trouble. There are 4 jail cells in Sheriff Baker's station. Vincent Hogan was in one, Bill Warner was in one, and Mike Childress was in one. The 4th and last cell was empty because Ray Booth, brother to Jane Baker and ringleader of the 3 hoods who beat Nick black and blue, had skipped town. For the most part, Nick sat turned away from the cells so he wouldn't be able to lip-read his prisoners' taunts and jeers. But every now and then, he caught a tidbit. Chicken bastard, ain't he? So Nick had an appropriate response ready. At the request of Jane Baker, Nick wrote out his life story. It was mostly the story of how he'd learned to read and write. He had grown up in an orphanage, angry and isolated, unreachable. Then a teacher, Rudy Sparkman, decided he was worth something. Gave Nick a blank sheet of paper, pointed at it, pointed at Nick, then pointed at the sheet again. Took Nick a while to figure it out, but he did, finally. Rudy was saying to him, "You are this blank page. You are this blank page." 6 years of struggle later, he could read, write, and read lips. That night, Nick dreamed. He was walking along a country road through endless fields of green corn, looking for something, but he didn't know what. And he was terribly afraid of something that seemed to be behind him, following him. Day off, Ma. I have a cold that wants to break me. I hate to call in sick on Friday. So many people do. But I'm running a fever and I have swollen glands. And yet there she was, scrambling him some eggs with the same whisk she'd been using since she was a first grader at PS 162. Did you call the doctor? No, sir. I'll stay home and take aspirin, and by tomorrow this time I'll be on a downhill side of it. Since there was no arguing with her, Larry tried to help instead. Honestly, you're gonna give yourself a hernia so I can watch Let's Make a Deal. After getting her juice and NyQuil at the bodega, they realized there was little to do except get on each other's nerves. Larry told Alice he might go out and see some more of the city. That's a good idea. I'm gonna take a nap, I think. You're a good boy, Larry. Rest, Ma. I love you. He took the subway to Times Square, getting more excited with each stop. He expected the city to look different since the last time he'd seen it, more magical somehow. But when he came up the stairs from the R train, it all looked the same. Oh, there were fewer massage parlors and X-rated movies, but it was very much the same city he had left behind. And that made Larry sad. He had realized, in a matter of seconds, that he had forgotten what it was like to be a part of New York, and that he had no particular urge to relearn. Passing in front of a discount record store, he heard his own voice coming from battered speakers above the door. That's me, Larry thought. Suddenly he wanted to be anywhere but under New York's gray washtub sky, smelling New York's exhaust, worried someone was going to lift his wallet. He wanted desperately to be back home on the West Coast. What is it now, Len? The press, General. A doctor in Sap Springs, Texas, about 400 miles from Arnett, has apparently made some good guesses about Blue. And now, a pair of reporters from Houston have linked what's happening in Sap Springs to what's already happened in Arnett, Verona, Commerce City, Pauliston, and every other damn town we've quarantined. So our little situation is about to see print. Looks like. What do you want to do here, Bill? A regrettable incident has occurred, Len, involving a branch of the United States military. At a certain point, you stop questioning the roots of the incident and you start asking yourself, how can that branch best be pruned? The service is mother and father to us, Len. And if you find your mother raped and your father beaten and robbed, before you call the police or start an investigation, you cover their nakedness. Because you love them. Extreme covert countermeasures, Len. Troy. Bill. I repeat, Len. Troy. Holy God, what the hell is this? I don't know. Listen, maybe we better wait here if you want. Alright, someone want to tell me what the damn problem is? Holy... The reporter had spent 3 years in the Army. Even though they weren't wearing uniforms, he recognized the men as soldiers. As the slugs blew out his chest and groin, he wondered if his executioners were somehow connected to the mysterious flu he was investigating. Run! Only chance! Down the shoulder! The photographer's last conscious thoughts. I'm gonna make it. I can run forever. Then he heard a blast, and the brains exited the front of his head. Needless to say, there were no published reports of disease or any other trouble in Sap Springs, Texas that day. Troy indeed. Stu Redman was frightened. Before, back in Atlanta, it felt like he'd been in a hospital. Now, after a 3-ring circus move to the Green Mountains of Vermont, he felt like he was in a jail cell. Something must have happened. Someone must have slipped. No one confirmed this, but Stu had a sense that most everyone back in Atlanta must be getting a chance to research the superflu firsthand. They were still doing tests on him here, but they seemed desultory. The schedule was slipshod.
Mr. Redman.
Even worse was the guns. No one came into his room unless accompanied by a soldier with a gun. The guns meant, in a way, that he had become expendable. No more games like he had pulled on Dietz. The simple fact was, Stu Redman was scared for his life. Being under detention was bad. Being under detention and being expendable? That was very bad.
Thank you, Mr. Redman.
And not for the first time, Stu wondered if it was possible to escape from this place. Nick Andros, mending the prison while Sheriff Baker recuperates at home. Ray's gonna be back, you know. When he gets back, be gonna wish he was blind as well as deaf and dumb. Hey, dummy, can we get some breakfast, do you think? And a doctor. I'm sick. I need a doctor. Nick left a note before heading out. Dear Sheriff or whoever, I've gone to get breakfast for the prisoners and to see if I can't hunt down Doc Soames for Vince Hogan, who appears to be really sick and not playing possum. Nick Andros. Well, Franny Goldsmith's been trying for the last 3 hours to write a letter to Grace Duggan, a high school chum now going to Smith. It wasn't meant to be a confessional I'm pregnant letter, just a friendly how are you letter, but it wasn't allowing itself to be written. Thus far, Franny had managed, I have problems of my own. Boy, do I have problems. I just don't have the heart to write them all down. Jess, the father of Franny's child, calling from Portland. You got a lot of static at home, huh? Well, I got some. She didn't want to get into the scene she had had with her mother. That would have made them conspirators of a sort, and Fran and Jess weren't. Not anymore. My offer still stands, Franny. Say yes, and I can buy a couple of rings and be there this afternoon. I know you could, Jess, but I'm not ready to get married, and that has nothing to do with you. Her voice was calm. She didn't want to giggle or cry, though there was a danger of both. What about the baby? I'm gonna have it, and then give it up? I haven't decided. I wonder about that baby. Franny doubted if Jess really did, but it was maybe the only thing he could think of to say that would cut her, and it did. Jessie, neither of us wanted this baby. We agreed on the pill so this baby wouldn't happen. You don't have any responsibility. They talked some more, awkwardly, and when they hung up, they didn't say I love you. And that was a first. It made Fran sad, so she got back to her note. I expect to celebrate with you on the 4th, unless your plans have changed. When I see you, I'll tell you all. I sure could use your advice. The second call was from her father, phoning to say that her mother was sick and that the doctor had been by to see her. Flu? Oh, Lord, Daddy, that's no joke for a woman her age.
No, it isn't.
A stab of worry went through Fran's heart. I told old Doc Edmonton everything. About your baby, about the fight you and Carla had. I want to know if any of that could have caused her physical breakdown. He said no, flu is flu. Flu made who? Edmonton said there's a nasty breed going around. And you know how busy your mother keeps herself with these charities. She works harder than me. She had the welcome mat out for the first evil germ that passed her way, that's all. Peter was trying to keep his daughter from feeling guilty. It wasn't working. Do you think she'd mind if I...
Right now she would, Franny. But give her time. She'll come around.
Maybe she would if I gave up my baby, Fran thought. At the end of their conversation, Peter promised his daughter that he would visit or call if Carla's situation worsened. Then, after much agonizing, Fran finally finished her letter to Grace. Believe in me, and I'll believe in you. Outside, purple and black clouds were gathering over Ogunquit Harbor. A storm was coming. Jane's Place, we're open. To anything.
Listen, wise guy, this isn't... Wait a minute, Larry?
Yeah, Arlene, it's me, hi. Where are you, Larry? Nobody's seen you. Well, I'm on the East Coast. Somebody told me there were bloodsuckers on me and I ought to get out of the pool till they dropped off.
Come to think of it, I heard something about that big spender. Yeah, listen, Arlene, is Wayne Stuckey around? I want to thank him for something.
You mean you haven't heard?
He's in the hospital with this blue bug.
Captain Trips, they're calling it out here. Not that it's any laughing matter. People are scared staying in. We got 6 empty tables, and you know Jane's never had any empty tables. How's Wayne doing? Who knows? The hospitals have wards and wards of sick people, but no one can visit them. And there are lots of soldiers on the streets riding around with convoys with guns. It's spooky, Larry. People are saying the army got careless with one of those little plague jars. That's just scare talk. There hasn't been anything in the news.
Out here, there's been a little thing in the paper about getting flu boosters. But that's it. Better off where you are if you haven't gotten whiff of this.
Larry was thinking of his mother's cold, and how it had gotten better, then worse, and was now awful. And hadn't there been a lot of sneezing and coughing in the arcade he'd been in earlier? Like a TB ward. New York. Thy name is paranoid. Lloyd Henry, described in the paper as the baby-faced, unrepentant killer, meeting with his court-appointed attorney, Andy Devins.
You were scared of Pope Freeman.
Well, I wasn't exactly.
You were terrified, Sylvester. You were sweating bullets.
And he held a gun on you at several points in that time during your so-called killing spree.
No, he never...
Yes, he did, Sylvester. You just forgot for a while. In fact, he threatened to kill you if you didn't back him up. Isn't that right? Listen, Mr. Devins, first of all, my name's not... Listen to me, Sylvester, and listen carefully. You don't have the slightest idea how big a jam you're in. You're going to trial in 4 days. We'll have a jury on the first day. The state will present its case on the second. I'll try to take up 3 days. I'll filibuster on my opening and closing statements. But then, the jury will retire and find you guilty in about 3 minutes. And then, why, then you go on to death row and state prison and enjoy all that good food until it's time to ride the lightning. It won't take long.
You scared, Sylvester?
Christ, yes, I'm scared. From what you say, I'm a dead man. I don't want you dead, Lloyd, but I do need you scared. If you go into that courtroom smirking and swaggering, they'll strap you in that chair and throw the switch. But if you listen to me, we might be able to squeak through. I don't say we will, I say we might.
I understand.
Glad to hear it. Now, I believe if you search your memory, you'll remember Pope telling you that your gun was loaded with blanks and nobody was more surprised than you when it started firing real bullets, yes? Lloyd was like a bad student who had finally grasped his teacher's lessons. Yes, sir. About damn near had a hemorrhage. And you were about to turn your gun on Pope Freeman when he was cut down, saving you the trouble, correct? Stupid as he was, Lloyd Henry knew that unless a goddamn miracle happened, he'd have one roll with that jury. Double or nothing. Mr. Devins? That's just the way it went down, yes. Sheriff Baker's dead. He died a little after 2 o'clock this morning. Now his wife Janie's sick with it. Doc Soames' car had been weaving slowly down Main Street when Nick happened across it and waved for him to stop. Soames looked as if he had aged 20 years since the last time Nick saw him, when Soames treated his injuries. And Baker's not the only one. I've signed 12 death certificates in the last 12 hours. And I know another 20 who will be dead by noon unless God shows mercy. but I doubt if this is God's duty. What's the matter with him? I don't know, but I got it myself. Although what I'm suffering right now is simple exhaustion. Help me out of that car, Nick. To that bench over there. You're good to talk to. I suppose you've been told that. Symptoms are all very common. Chills, fever, headache, weakness, and loss of appetite. Painful urination, swelling of the glands, armpits, and then the groin. Respiratory weakness and failure. Those are the symptoms of the common cold, of influenza, of pneumonia. We can cure all those, Nick, but not this. This thing escalates, backs up, escalates again. Debilitation increases, the swelling gets worse, and finally, in every case I believe, death. Someone made a mistake, and they're trying to cover it up. Sounds slightly paranoid, doesn't it? But none of the phones in Shoyo work. And furthermore, the 2 Shoyo exits from the turnpike are closed off with barriers which say road construction. There's no construction. There's soldiers too, I've heard, at the exits, on the back roads, army vehicles blocking every way in and out of town. I repeat, someone made a mistake and now they're trying to cover it up. And in the meantime, how many people will die? Madness, madness. And you, Nick, how do you feel? A cold, sneezing, coughing? Nick shook his head no to each one. Will you try to leave town? I think you could, if you went by the fields. I can't leave the man I locked up. I'll get them fed, then go see Miss Baker. You're a thoughtful boy. That's rare. A boy in this degraded age who has a sense of responsibility is even rarer. You'll be careful of those 3 you have locked up, won't you? Nick nodded soberly. When he got back to the jail with breakfast, both Billy and Mike looked badly frightened as Vince Hogan was delirious with a fever. By 6 o'clock that evening, he would be dead. Mom! Larry tried calling to his mother. There'd be no answer. From behind her apartment's locked door, he heard a groan. Mom, where are you? Now a louder groan coming from... Jesus, Mom! Alice Underwood was laying on the floor, half in and half out of her bedroom. Her breathing was ragged, clogged with phlegm. Larry? I'm going to put you in your bed, Mom. The heat Alice's body was giving off terrified Larry. No one could remain so hot and live, he thought. Her brains must be frying in her head. Larry, go get your father. He's in the bar with that photographer. Outside, thunder was rumbling and rain was splattering the windows. Inside, you go tell your dad I said come home. Inside, Larry was dialing Mercy Hospital. Come on, come on. From his mother's bedroom, he heard a scream that chilled his blood. The phone rang 3 times. There was a buzzing sound, then a click, then a bright mechanical voice.
You have reached Mercy General Hospital. Right now, all of our circuits are busy. If you will hold, your call will be taken as soon as possible. Thank you.
Damn! Should he call a private ambulance? Or see if Mrs. Freeman, Alice's downstairs neighbor, would watch her while he went to the hospital himself? Mr. Freeman, he'd start there. Mom, listen to me. I'll be back. I'm going to go to the hospital. Larry was scared, terrified for his mother, but underneath that fear, another voice was talking to him, asking questions like, why do these things always happen to me? Why now? When I was finally turning it around. And the most despicable of all, how bad is Mom going to screw up my plans? How much of my life am I going to have to change around to deal with her mess? Larry hated that voice, that part of himself, and wished he could die a quick, nasty death. But it was still going strong as he knocked on Mr. Freeman's door. Mr. Freeman! It's Larry Underwood, Alice's boy! Mr. Freeman! If you're there, I need your help! Knocking that echoed like thunder. Daddy? What is it? Is it Mom? Franny? Responsibility is a pie, Franny thought. Some of it would have to be hers. It wasn't just charity work that made Carla Goldsmith sick. Is Mom all right? Tell me, Daddy. She got worse about a half hour after we talked. Her fever went up. She started to rave. I called the Sanford Hospital and they said that their ambulances were out on calls. Both of them. But that they would add Carla to their list. List? Since when do ambulances have waiting lists? They finally came about 15 minutes ago, and there were 6 people in the back of that ambulance. Your mother came out of it a little as they put her in, and she kept saying, I can't catch my breath, Peter. Why can't I breathe? Christ, Franny. What's happening? Daddy. Guilt gnawed at Franny. furry bodies inside her belly, where that other thing was, her baby, and she began to cry. Eat your pie, she told herself as she hugged her father. It tastes terrible and bitter, but eat your pie. Have seconds, have thirds. Eat your pie, Franny Goldsmith, eat every bite. In a kind of terrible odd coincidence, Alice Underwood in New York, Carla Goldsmith in Maine, and Jane Baker, who had shown Nick Andrews such kindness in Shoyo, would all three die the same day, mere hours apart. President called me. I've been relieved, Lynn. Of course, I knew it was coming, but it still hurts like hell. Jesus, Bill, when this country ought to be getting on its knees to kiss your feet. You're in charge now, Lynn. The President wants you in Washington as soon as you can get there. You're gonna have to tell him. It's out of control now. It's popped up in Oregon, Nebraska, Louisiana, Florida. Yeah, tentative cases in Mexico and Chile, too. The report just came in, and we're getting exactly nowhere with Stuart Redmond. Did you know we actually injected him with the blue virus? He thought it was a sedative. His body killed the virus, and no one has the slightest idea how. My daughter gave me a book of poems some years ago, Lynn, by a man named Yeats. He said that things fall apart, that the center doesn't always hold. The end of one poem gave me goosebumps the first time I read it, and it still does. What rough beast its hour comes round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. The beast is on its way, Lynn, and it's a good deal rougher than that fellow Yeats ever could have imagined. Things are falling apart. The job, your job, is to hold as much as you can together for as long as you can. Yes, sir. Yes, Billy. I have business to attend to. General Starkey slipped his West Point ring off his right hand and his wedding band off his left. For my daughter Cindy. See that she gets them, Len. I will, sir. Both men stood ramrod straight and saluted each other, tears streaming down Len Creighton's face. Starkey went to Project Blue's cafeteria, where Private Frank D. Bruce still lay with his face in a bowl of soup. Another dead man had a sign written in magic marker tied around his neck with a shoelace. Now you know it works. Any questions? Starkey was sobbing as he loosened the strap over the butt of his pistol and put its barrel into his mouth. When the blast came, it was muffled and undramatic. None of the corpses in the room of the dead took notice. None of them told Starkey that he'd been right, that the beast was coming. Randall Flagg, the Dark Man, strode south on US 51. It was an hour before dawn, and he was somewhere between Gransmere and Riddle, west of Twin Falls, still north of the Duck Valley Reservation that spreads across 2 states. And wasn't it a fine night? Randall Flagg was a man of no age, a man called the Walking Dude, or sometimes the Boogeyman. He wore faded peg jeans and a denim jacket, with a button on each breast. There was a Boy Scout knapsack over his shoulder, old and battered, stuffed, like his pockets, with 50 different kinds of conflicting literature, pamphlets for all seasons, rhetoric for all reasons. When this man handed you a brochure, you took it no matter what the subject. The dangers of atomic plants, the role played by the international Jewish cartel in the overthrow of friendly governments, the CIA, the Contra cocaine connection, the blacks for militant equality, the code of the Klan. Flagg had them all, and more too. There was a dark hilarity in his face, and in his heart too, you would think, and you'd be right. It was the face of a hateful, happy man, a face that radiated a horrible, handsome warmth. A face to make water glasses shatter in the hands of hardened truck stop waitresses, to make small children crash their trikes into board fences and then cower against their mothers. Flagg was walking south, listening to the night sounds that pressed close on both sides, the worn heels of his sharp-toed cowboy boots clopping on the pavement. If car lights showed on the horizon as he walked, he would fade back and back down over the soft shoulder into the high grass where the night bugs made their homes, and the car would pass him. The driver would feel a slight chill, as though he had driven through an air pocket, and his sleeping wife and child stir uneasily, as they had been touched by a bad dream in the same instant. And then Flagg would resume walking along the highway that would take him, sooner or later, out of Idaho and into Nevada. And from there, well, he might go anywhere. Anywhere in the country. Some campus group, probably either students for domestic society or the young Maoists, have been busy with a copy machine during the night. Attention, attention, attention. You are being lied to. The government is lying to you. The press is lying to you. The administration is lying to you. There is no superflu vaccine. Superflu is not a serious disease. It is a deadly disease. Superflu was developed by the forces of the U.S. pig paramilitary, who are now covering up their murderous blunder, even if it means 75% of the population will die. Meeting in gym at 7 p.m. Strike, 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 strike. In the morning, posters had been plastered all over the buildings, with similar flyers, variations on theme, going up in colleges and university campuses around the country. The flames were being fanned. Flag would spend the entire night walking and smiling. What happened at WBZ-TV had been planned the night before by 3 newscasters and 6 technicians. 5 of them played poker regularly, and 6 of the 9 were already ill. They had felt they had nothing to lose, beginning with morning news anchor Bob Palmer. Fellow citizens of Boston, and Americans in our broadcast area. Something both grave and terribly important has just happened in this studio. I'm very glad it happened here first, in Boston, the cradle of American independence. At 9:01 a.m., just after Palmer had begun to read the soothing copy he had been handed by an Army non-com, a coup took place. For the last 7 days, this broadcast facility has been under guard by men purporting to be National Guardsmen. The 9 rebels, all long-timers at WBZ-TV, armed with guns they'd snuck in, took the television station back from the soldiers, who hadn't expected any trouble from a soft bunch of civilians. Has the news been managed? I am sorry to say that this is the case. For the last week, I have been given false copy and forced to read it, almost literally with a gun to my head. But we here, who have just liberated our own station, have some footage that wasn't confiscated or destroyed, taken clandestinely, of poor quality, yet we think you must see it. If you have children, ladies and gentlemen, we would advise that you ask them to leave the room. What followed next was a grainy, jittery footage of a truck at the edge of a pier jutting out over Boston Harbor. Bodies were cascading out of the truck into the harbor. Women, old men, children, nurses, police, tumbling in a cartwheel flood that never seemed to end. And at some point during the film clip, it became clear that soldiers were using pitchforks to get the bodies off the truck. At dawn, Flag would camp and sleep the day away, waking up as evening drew on. He would read over his supper cooked over a small, smokeless campfire, words from battered and coverless paperback porno novel, or maybe Mein Kampf, or an R. Crumb comic book. When it came to printed word, Flag was an equal opportunity reader. After supper, he would commence walking again, cutting through godforsaken wilderness, watching and smelling and listening as the climate grew more arid, and the mountains began to poke out of the earth like dinosaur spines. The country was a body politic with its network of roads embedded in its skin like marvelous capillaries, ready to take him, a dark speck of foreign matter, anywhere or everywhere. Heart, liver, brain, it was a clot waiting to happen, a splinter of bone, hunting a soft organ to puncture. A lonely lunatic cell looking for a mate with which to raise a cozy little malignant tumor. A secret skeleton crew at the Los Angeles Times worked through the night to print up 26,000 copies of their one-page extra. Its headline, printed in 36-point type, screamed, "West Coast in grip of plague epidemic. Thousands flee deadly superflu. Government cover-up certain. The president is scheduled to address the nation tonight at 6 o'clock Pacific time." Allegedly from the Oval Office. Advanced copies of the president's speech indicate he will spank the American people for overreacting, and compare the current panic to that which followed Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio broadcast. The Times has 4 questions it wishes the president to answer in his speech. Why has the Times been enjoined from printing the news by thugs in army uniforms, in direct violation of its constitutional right to do so? Why have the following highways, US 5, US 10, US 15, been blocked off by armored cars and troop carriers? If this is a minor outbreak of flu, then why are barge trains being towed out into the Pacific and dumped? And do these barges contain the dead bodies of plague victims? Finally, if a vaccine really exists, why has not one clinic been set up to administer flu shots? We call upon the president to answer these questions in his speech, and to end these police state tactics and this insane effort to cover up the truth. Flag was known, well known along the highways in hiding that are traveled by the poor and the mad, by the professional revolutionaries and those who have been taught to hate so well that their hate shows on their faces like hair lips, by the people unwanted except by others like them, squatting in cheap rooms with slogans and posters on the walls, and basements where links of sawed-off pipe are stuffed with high explosives. Flag was always welcome in the back rooms where lunatic plans were laid. To kill a cabinet member, to kidnap the child of a visiting dignitary, to break into the boardroom of an oil company with grenades. And when he joined a meeting, everything stopped. It was as if he had shown up with some old and terrible engine of destruction, some internal gift, a birthday cake with nitroglycerin candles. Then the talk would begin again, but it would be rational and disciplined as madmen could manage, and things would be agreed upon. As for the women he went to bed with, when it was done, they were cold, so cold, it seemed impossible they could ever be warm again. The highest rated morning show in the city was KLFT's morning call-in show, Speak Your Piece with Ray Flowers, who was, on the morning of June 26th, the only KLFT employee to show up for work. Everyone else had gotten or was getting sick, but Ray himself felt fine. He was aware, though, of what was happening in the outside world, and it scared him. He double-locked the studio's door and then got into his booth and locked that before beginning his broadcast.
Hi, y'all. This is Ray Flowers on Speak Your Piece. And this morning, I guess there's only one thing to call in and talk about, isn't there? You can call it tube neck or super flu or Captain Trips, but it all means the same thing. Now, I've heard some horror stories about the Army clamping down on everything. So if you want to talk about that, I'm willing to listen. Still a free country, right? Our toll-free numbers are 555-8600 and 555-8601. And if you get a busy signal, call back. It's just me here, doing it all myself.
Retired lawyer James D. Hogless was the editor and publisher of the weekly newspaper called the Durban Call-Clarion. Its circulation was high because Hogless was a staunch defender of minors' rights, and because his editorials were always filled with hellfire, aimed at every level of government hack. Today, this clear summer morning, Hogless put out an extra edition, his first since the Great Ladybird Mine disaster of 1980, and was delivering it himself because all of his paperboys were sick or dead. From Hogless Special Edition. It has been revealed to this reporter by a reliable source that the flu epidemic, sometimes called choking sickness here in West Virginia, is in reality a deadly mutation of the ordinary flu virus created by the American government. Hogless got so far as Poverty Row on the west side of Durban before Captain Trips overcame him. He collapsed and died against his Cadillac, the only kind of car he's owned since his 27th birthday. The last thing he heard was the bubbling of Durban stream where he had fished as a boy. Promises of a soon forthcoming vaccine are a bald-faced lie. No vaccine has been developed. Citizens, this is more than a disaster or tragedy. It is the end of all hope in our government. If we have, indeed, done such a thing to ourselves, then, of all the stories circulating about superflu, Hogless was the most accurate, and his source had been an Army major with dark, haunted eyes who had been transferred to Wheeling from someplace top secret in California called Project Blue.
My fellow Americans, as the great nation we are, we cannot afford to jump at shadows like small children in a dark room. But neither can we take this serious outbreak of influenza lightly. If you feel ill, I urge you to stay at home, stay in bed, take aspirin, and drink plenty of liquids. Be confident that you will feel better in a week at most. There is no truth to the rumor that this strain of flu is fatal.
I love you, Daddy. Franny loves you. Be at peace.
In the greatest majority of cases, those afflicted can expect a complete and utter recovery. Further, there's been a vicious rumor promulgated by the certain radical anti-establishment groups that this strain of influenza has been bred by the government for military use. This is a flat-out falsehood. This country signed the revised Geneva Accords on poison gases, nerve gas, and germ warfare in good conscience and good faith. We have not now, nor have we ever. We have never been party to the clandestine manufacture of substances outlawed by the Geneva Convention. This is a moderately serious outbreak of influenza. No more, no less. We ask you to remain calm and secure in the knowledge that a flu vaccine will be available next week for those not already on the mend. National Guardsmen have been called out to some areas to protect the populace against hooligans, vandals, and scaremongers.
2,000 students on the Lexington campus, riled up by the flyers, organized an impromptu rally. Police were called in to contain the rioters. When the turkey shoot, as one of the witnesses described it, was finally over, 80 students had been mowed down by gunfire.
But there is no truth to the rumors that some cities have been occupied by regular forces or that news has been managed.
Bob Palmer and his crew broadcast for 2 hours, till somebody on the ground floor realized that they didn't have to retake the 6th floor to stop the transmission, and 20 pounds of plastique would do the trick just as well. The reprisal at the LA Times was swift and bloody. The official FBI story was that radical revolutionaries had dynamited the paper's presses, causing the deaths of 28 workers, when in fact, the 28 employees had been executed one by soldiers. It took the 20-man patrol an hour to get to Springfield from Carthage. In that hour, Ray Flowers took calls from a doctor who said people were dying like flies, a nurse who confirmed bodies were being removed from her Kansas City hospital by the truckload, a delirious woman who blamed flying saucers from outer space, and a dozen others with their own stories to tell. After the death squad broke through all of the locked doors, the last words Ray spoke on the air were, "I think they're going to shoot me." Flagg rocked along, his feet easy in his boots, which were comfortably sprung in all the right places. His feet in these boots were old lovers. In Mountain City, Christopher Brendenton, who ran an underground railroad for fugitives, and who was waiting for Flagg with a fresh set of papers and a clean car, knew him as Richard Fry. In New York, he'd been known as Richard Frang, and his claim that he was a black man had never been disputed, although his skin was very light. He and a black veteran of the Vietnam War, with more than enough hatred in his heart to make up for the missing left leg, once killed 6 cops in a single night. In Georgia, he'd been Ramsey Forrest, and in his white sheet, he had participated in 2 rapes, a castration, and the burning of a shantytown. That was a long time ago, the early 60s, the first civil rights surge. Flagg sometimes thought he might have been born in that strife. Certainly he couldn't remember much that had happened before that, except that he came originally from Nebraska, and that he attended high school classes with a red-haired, bandy-legged boy named Charles Starkweather. The civil rights marches of 1960 and 1961 were clear in his mind. The beatings, the night raids, the churches that had exploded as if some miracle had grown too large to be contained within them. 1962, he drifted down to New Orleans and met a demented young man who was handing out tracts urging Americans to leave Cuba alone. The man's last name, Flagg remembered, was Oswald, and he still had some of those tracts crumpled in his knapsack. Over the years, Flagg had walked in demonstrations against the same dozen companies and 100 different colleges. He wrote the questions that most discomforted those in power when they came to a lecture, but never asked the questions himself. Likewise, he never spoke at rallies because the microphones would scream with hysterical feedback if he did, though he wrote the speeches for the speakers. And on several occasions, those speeches ended up in riots and violent demonstrations. For a while in the early 70s, he had been acquainted with a man named Donald DeFreeze. It was actually the person who suggested that DeFreeze take the name Sink. Flagg helped formulate the plans that resulted in DeFreeze's kidnapping of an heiress, and recommended that instead of simply ransoming the heiress, she should be driven insane. He left the house in Los Angeles where DeFreeze and the others fried, moments before the police had moved in. He skulked away up the street, a fiery grin on his face. When the few tattered remains of DeFreeze's group were swept up, they all mentioned that there had been someone else associated with the group, a hanger-on, but nevertheless, someone important, a man of no age, with no face, called the Walking Dude, or sometimes the Boogeyman. Flagg strode on at a steady, ground-eating pace. 2 days ago, he had been in Laramie, Wyoming. Today, he was on US 51 between Gransmere and Riddle on his way to Mountain City. Tomorrow, he would be somewhere else, and he was happier than he had ever been because he stopped because something's coming. He could taste it, a hot, sooty taste, as if God were planning a cookout, and all of civilization was going to be the barbecue. He had been born when times changed, and the times were about to change again. It was in the wind of this soft Idaho evening. He knew it was almost time to be reborn. Else, why could he suddenly do magic? Flagg felt the inches of dawn stain the sky and lowered himself back down to the ground. The time was not yet. He began to walk again, grinning, now looking for a place to lay up for the day. The time of his transfiguration was soon, and that was enough for now.